Right. Hi everyone, welcome to our first of our science CPD session. So I'm not sure everyone was on before when I started talking. So we'll make a start now. It's 4. It is being recorded. Let me just admit some more people. So it is being recorded. I think the plan is that all the CPD sessions will be sent out across the trust, even the in-person ones. So everything where possible is being filmed and then can be shared in case there was multiple ones that you may want to have attended, etc. Oh, let me just share my screen with you all now. So the plan was tonight that I was going to have breakout rooms, have lots of stuff going on as part of the presentation, but I don't know, many of you will have heard that Q3 we've had Ofsted in today, and science has been one of the subjects that have been deep dive today. So I feel this is a bit of a rushed dashing from one meeting to another today and then appearing online to you all today. So I do apologise that yeah, it's a little bit of me listening to me today, but feel free to come onto your mics as and when you'd like to, and to just contribute ideas or question and add to what is being shared for tonight. Let me just admit a few more people in. There we go. Right, everyone should be in. We've just got a couple more people joining. Right, and so I assume you can all see my screen. So a chance to look at maybe something that looks familiar to all of you as you enter into classrooms. Got a couple more people joining. So saying it looks familiar for everyone as they enter into our classrooms, perhaps in the day, is this quiz that you can see up on the board, up on your screens now. So just have a couple of minutes, maybe chatting with the people that you are joining online with tonight. What would your answers to these questions be? Sorry about that. So hope you've had a good chance. I can see some of you putting them in the chat, what some of your answers would be. So at school, we might be calling this within our own schools. Perhaps it's the start of the do now, the pre-quiz, but the purpose of it being often that we want to be doing this retrieval practice. So when we're talking about making retrieval practices impactful in science, we are referring to the act of recalling learned information from our memory with little or no support. And every time that info is retrieved or an answer is generated, it's then that process, that changing that original memory, making it deeper, making it stronger, making it easier for those students to access in the future. So How did this task make you feel? Perhaps if we've been doing it face to face, you might have been feeling even more nervous. Did it motivate you, inspire you, bring up anxieties, make you shut down? This is going to be too hard. This is a bit too much effort. There's no point in trying. And this is often what we greet our students with each lesson in the name of retrieval practice, formative assessment, testing effect, test enhanced learning, prior learning checks, whatever we might call it. And research shows that the more someone practices retrieval or actively engages with the subject, the better their long-term learning is. And it's great for us as teachers because this short 3 questions at the start can help us identify what concepts our students struggle with. We can then pinpoint what we need to focus on. But this session is all about making this as effective as possible for us, and also as positive for us and the students who experience this retrieval practice. And it's the same with anything new in education. Sometimes it can become dangerous, sometimes it can be overused, sometimes we can just see it as this golden bullet that is going to be the solution to all our problems. So those of you wanting to know, obviously, Galileo was the development of the scientific method. The species is the common house spider, and the name of the molecule on here. So depending on your subject specialism, you probably felt more confident or less confident, or maybe how many pub quizzes, etc. you've done in the past, maybe more or less confident asking some of these questions, because I hadn't asked you to prepare for them. I hadn't told you they were going to be asked, and maybe, you know, that would have helped your retrieval of them. So retrieval practice isn't the same as assessment per se. It is meant to be a learning strategy, and we're helping students to learn and be able to use the material, and strengthen their schema that they have built. And this will enable them to then excel in their assessments. So it's about the process of practicing the remembering. So what are the key principles, and how can we make it as effective as possible? So key is obviously that it's time efficient and workload efficient for us as staff. Otherwise, it can't be maintained. It's got to be able to quickly check and correct students' answers. It's got to involve the whole class. Possibly the bottom one, specify the knowledge beforehand. We're going to be looking at each of these over the next part of this session, and just exploring what we can and can't do in these situations to make it as most effective as possible. So if we consider the first one, keeping it generative. So what exactly does this mean? Well, it means that we need to be closing the books, the notebooks, the laptops, the phones, if students are at home. We've got to be making the students think for themselves, because otherwise we're not testing their ability to retrieve that knowledge. We're testing their ability to be able to go and find it in their exercise book, to be resourceful rather than to be able to retrieve it. So retrieval practice is made up of 2 parts. We've got our retrieval storage, that's how well embedded the concept is in our long-term memory, how well organised that is. Then we've got the retrieval strength, how easily can students bring that to their mind when they need it. And there's plenty of studies out there that will find that you can find in support of the power of self-testing. And it's important to remember that whatever retrieval practice we choose to implement in our class, variety is key. Quizzing and self-testing aren't the only ways, and we'll discuss some different ways over the course of the session. There's a study highlights that we can see up on the screen here. It's best when there was demand in the questions, that the quizzing didn't just entail multiple choices. And there's that balance needs to be struck between challenging our students and the frustration of the students as they walk in and they feel that they can't access that learning, they can't remember it, and stopping them, shutting down before our lessons even begin, or mid-lesson if you're doing a prior knowledge check for the next one, you just want to check what they know. We want to keep them engaged. It's important that the retrieval practice should match the demands of the assessment, so it can't just be recall of facts all the time if actually our assessment is going to demand higher order questioning skills, because if we're linking back to that retrieval storage, retrieval strength, how easily can they bring it to mind? Can they bring it to mind in the right situations? So do they have those skills? So if we're going to be preparing them for assessments that demand higher order questioning, some of the retrieval that we do with students has to test their ability to do that and their application. So there's a time for the different methods, and we need to plan for that as staff, perhaps midway for it. Once they've just learned information, that would be, factual recall, multiple choices. Whereas once the material is embedded and we're moving on to the application, linking it to other topics, then we need to move away from the quizzing, multiple choices, and use some different strategies. So keeping it varied. I'm sure many of you read or follow on Twitter, etc. Tom Sherrington's post. So Kate's quite a poignant point here on the idea of variety and linking in here. So do we do retrieval practice every lesson? Possibly. I imagine the answer for many of us is yes. I know particularly at my school it is an embedded part of our practice. So for us the lesson does begin with a quiz like the ones you saw at the start. Perhaps for some of you that I've spoken to, homework is often a quiz-based thing. It might be web-based, various programs that we use throughout the trust with the Tassimo, the Caboodles. Maybe they're paper-based still. But what questions make up those quizzes? Do we have that formulaic approach from one last lesson, month, topic, year, week? So do we provide that rich diet for students? So is this, are students getting bored by the same repetition? How would you feel if your diet every day was the same? Quizzes to start every lesson across the school, every lesson in science, every homework that you ever get. Would it engage you? Would it infuse you? So maybe let's look at a more realistic example than we perhaps saw at the start. So imagine you've got a year 11 biology class and nearing the end of their course, pretty much studied everything. You're about to start the topic, relationships and ecosystems. And you're going to do in your first lesson, decay in the carbon cycle. So you expect at this point in the course, students have learned everything else, that they are revising at home, that they are preparing themselves for their exam, and you would hope that the retrieval of knowledge at this point should be quite strong. But if you haven't told them before, and what the specified knowledge was going to be for this pre-quiz or do now task, how will some of your students feel? Those conscientious ones that are revising at home, high anxiety, really, really putting the pressure on themselves, or those with the low self-esteem. And what will this quiz tell you? Just enter the persons in the lobby quickly. I apologise. So what will this quiz tell you then? Is it going to tell you what prior knowledge they know they have from your lesson? Yes, it is. And then that's going to enable you to adapt your lesson, adapt the direction of your lesson. And you've also checked students' ability to retrieve it. Perhaps it's going to tell you they don't have the long-term memory or a well-developed schema. If so, how will that be changed? What are you going to do differently because of that? What skills do we have? What strategies and support systems are in place to change that? And on the other hand, the flip side, what does this tell the students when they come in and do this do now quiz? What they don't know, that science is hard, that they need to give up. The teacher catches them out, doesn't matter how hard I study. They're just random quizzes every lesson. Who knows what I'm going to be asked? There's no point putting the effort in. So here's another example of a retrieval quiz. So, you bring them in, they do this, maybe on the whiteboards, maybe in their exercise books. You reveal the answers as you go. Students, as they do, they sit there with their purple pen, their green pen, whatever the policy is in your school, and they comply and they write down those corrections. But have they learned it? Or have you just reinforced that they're no good at science? There's no point trying. They should focus their efforts on another subject that they can achieve in, that they enjoy more, is more variety, more excitement, all varied. And if you think back to how you felt at the start when I asked you those questions, did you think a little bit inside, hoping, well, I hope she's not going to ask someone to come on the microphone and ask people at random what their answers are? Did you feel if this had been face to face and I'd said, oh, write them on the whiteboards, everyone show me what you've got now, how would that have made you engage with this session? How would it make you feel? So as we're planning our retrieval activities, are we taking that spaced practice into account? And we're probably all familiar with the forgetting curve. And the key bit about retrieval is we need to slot it in at that point just before students are about to forget things. And I think this graph that I've put in here is probably over optimistic because it's assuming memory retention up at 100%. So remember, 100% retention of everything we taught them in a lesson, which we know for many, many reasons is never going to be the case as much as we would hope. And as I was researching this and trying to find some statistics and exactly when the best space practice is going to be, how long you should leave it, and there's lots of different ideas out there. I did find one interesting fact that almost all info that you store in your short-term memory that's not rehearsed or practiced is lost within 18 to 30 seconds, which I thought, I'm not entirely sure that could be completely true, but I found it quoted in a couple of places, and that would make it very, very quick that this stuff would be being forgotten. But the closer you are to forgetting a piece of information, the more likely it is that you'll benefit from trying to revise it, trying to recover it from that long-term memory, trying to do something active with it and refreshing your memory. So we need to, as staff, as teachers, think about ways of overcoming this curve. So planning our retrieval practice at that key bit. So when is the best time to review and check and retrieve a student's knowledge of photosynthesis that you taught them as the first topic of this year? Is it next week? Is it in 2 weeks? Is it just before their mocks? What is it, and what is the best time for you and your classes, and how does that fit within your curriculums as the point at which it is best to do it and ensure that students aren't forgetting it and we are developing their long-term memories? So one of the other key principles mentioned was involving everyone. So we do need to make sure that we are making sure our retrieval practice is not does anyone know, it is definitely the does everyone know. What can all our students in that class retrieve from their long-term memory at that moment in time? So imagine you do now retrieval quizzes at the start of the lesson. Are wrong answers sought out? Are they discussed? Are they explained? Or are students left none the wiser beyond knowing more that there was lots of stuff in science they didn't know and that science is hard, as many students think? Do you know there is stuff that students don't understand? Has your retrieval practice got an efficient way of telling you that information? And then enabling you to adapt your medium-term plans, adapt your next lesson, your next homework, whatever it should be, to put that support in place and bridge those gaps for those students. So do you know what percentage students got, what percentage students achieved, what percentage is enough for you to think, oh, I'll move on with this, they don't need it? And for some instances, a retrieval activity might be sufficient that it doesn't underpin the rest of your lesson and you can move on. You've got time to go and you've got time to think about, well, actually, how am I going to best help students overcome those barriers that they've got, those misconceptions that they've got, that inability they've got to retrieve that particular piece of information from their long-term memory, or to retrieve it in the right context. And there's lots of ways that we can do this with the show of hands for scores, use of mini whiteboards, our students which they got wrong, after another student perhaps who got it right to explain it. And there's lots of different ways of doing it. And I know probably many of us use good old-fashioned whiteboards, that very quick whole class feedback check. I know in our learning communities before we've been told, and I've tried it with my year 12s now, Plickers, great way of just quickly checking what the students know and don't know, and that free version of it, really good to use, and obviously it breaks up that quizzing, writing the answer, mini whiteboard, just that bit of variety, a bit of enthusiasm and excitement from the students when I tried it out, for sure. So far, I feel there's been a lot of focus on the role of quizzes, but obviously the quizzes aren't the only way that we can track our retrieval knowledge. And variety is always going to be key. So variety is also going to allow those students to explore their schema in different ways, strengthen their future recall. And there's a really good YouTube video in Tom Sheraton's Kitchen Pedagogy series on this as well, if you're interested in looking a bit more about some of the stuff behind the key of variety. And we, as well as teaching this retrieval practice and wanting students to be able to retrieve knowledge, we've also got to teach them and embed the study skills for students to use it, because students should be testing them, like checking themselves. They've spent, you know, an hour revising something. Well, what can they retrieve out of it several days later? Can they retrieve that knowledge that they think that they spent an hour revising on Monday? And in this kitchen pedagogy series, it does give the example of flashcards. You know, if you look at a flashcard long enough, you can convince yourself you know what's on that flashcard. If you covered it up or you went to bed, you'd still know what was on that flashcard the next day. And students, I'm sure, do it. But they need to know that they need to take it away. They need to develop that idea of self-checking, which is what we're trying to do for our space learning and our retrieval practice. And I know many of you might be in the same situation. My son came home the other day with his first lot of spellings for year 1. And, you know, he doesn't particularly enjoy school as it is. So it's that, you know, he'll read that list of spellings and he'll go, yeah, I know them. That's fine. It's fine. I've got to get going. I don't want to do this. I want to, you know, be on my bike, be whatever it is, doing something different. And he will convince himself that, yeah, he knows it. He can do it, you know, and we've tried. But trying to keep a 5-year-old motivated to learn the same 6 words for a week kind of gave me a new insight into, you know, keeping our students motivated to remember the same things again and again and again from the start of year 10 to the end of year 11, from year 12 to year 13, all of Key Stage 3, which we expect them to know so they can use it in Key Stage 4. So, you know, and it's easy to think when he tells me, yeah, I can say those spellings, I can phonetically do it. It's easy to think he does, and he can look at the posters we put up around the house, post-it notes, etc., and go, yeah, I can do it, and copy them down. But how easy is it to do that when he's in a different setting, when he's in the classroom, you know, when he's asked to sit in silence for the first time and, you know, do the spelling test, however it's going to be done. And it's been a real affirmation for me this week, watching him go from reading them at the start of the week and then being able to write them by the end of the week. And, you know, the variety that's needed to keep that motivation, and some of the different ways in which we can do it and how it's easy to fall into gaps. The trap of just the same old ways of testing our students' retrieval knowledge. So here are a few like different examples of how we could do it. Picking a topic that you've studied, and then getting students to write as much as they can remember in the first box, then reading it, putting them away, adding extra information, repeating this process again and again until they've got their full, complete answer for the topic. So you're checking their ability to retrieve that knowledge, to plug in their gaps. So we're teaching them those study skills. Another idea, Flashback Friday, or whatever day of the week you want to do, but you create a series of questions based on what the students revised that week for their subject, and then they've then got to try and answer them, you know, get people at home testing them on it. And something we can build into class as well, gives students some of that ownership on, you know, building these quizzes, making it a bit of a competition. But hopefully by doing it on a regular basis, it's going to be like putting it into chunks for them. This is another one, cops and robbers. So the cops column is you write as much as you can about a question in a period of time, maybe 5 minutes. And then the robbers column is anything you've had to then add to get it on. So maybe you do it within a class, maybe they do it at home, they've got to go and use their text, but they've got to use the mark scheme from a question they've just done. And they can just see how these two columns balance and beginning to spot the difference between the two of them. Like I said, excuse me, it doesn't just have to be multiple choice or closed question, short answer, ways of retrieving students' knowledge. If we're going to expect them to use their knowledge to answer higher order and application questions, then we need to get practicing them doing it. So asking them an open-ended question, asking them to just respond to it. And you can have success criteria beforehand that maybe you share with the students, maybe you don't. So therefore, you're narrowing down your ability to mark it, because it could just be a case of, you know, highlighting green the parts of the success criteria they have managed to get, pink for think the bits that they haven't managed. That's then their gaps, their bits that they need to go and work upon, or you as a teacher might identify a common theme within the class and think, well, I'm going to just tweak where I'm going with this lesson. We need to go and address this gap, or etc. So these open-ended questions are going to be adapted for lots of different abilities. Younger students maybe would definitely require more scaffolded approaches, but once you get to those more older, more able students, you can give them very, very open questions and just get them to begin to use some of their own study strategies to identify some of their gaps. Getting students to write at length is also a better way of us identifying sometimes some of their misconceptions, some of their clumsiness and their use of their tier 2 and their tier 3 words, which perhaps sometimes just slightly change the meaning of the science they're trying to say. So then you've also got all the ideas as well, like concept maps or mind maps. You know, you put the question on the board and students can build that mind map around it, that concept map. What do they know? Venn diagrams, lots of different graphic knowledge organised as well, get students to be putting their knowledge onto those, identifying the gaps that they've got, what can't they retrieve from memory. So space retrieval is obviously key within this, and it's going to depend upon us and our students and our curriculums how long we need to leave between our different retrieval practices. But in essence, we've got to teach, check, test. We've got to be checking constantly, is what we are telling students, what we're hoping they're going to be getting into their long-term memory, actually getting there. Once it's there, can they retrieve it confidently? And spacing works with the natural way your brain functions to maximise learning and memory retention as well. So loads of different ways that we can do this. And I know some, if we're looking back at some of those key principles that we mentioned back at the start, we've got to be involving everyone in whatever different strategy you choose to use. We've got to be having times when we do expect students to put everything away, to just be them and the piece of paper, or them and the quiz, them and whatever it is. Could they do it? Have they got the storage of it? Have they got the ability to retrieve it back out again? Can you check it? Can students then have the accuracy of their answers corrected? Is that easy to do? Could you do it if your teacher, I know some of us are lucky, some people are lucky they only teach their science specialism, but could you do it by whatever method you are using in that lesson if it was not your subject specialism? Say you're a biologist, you're teaching chemistry and physics, would you feel as confident with your method that you would be able to do that on the spot? Is it time efficient? So yes, we need to be developing students' ability to retrieve the information and be able to get it into the long-term memory, get it out, have the triggers. I think, oh, that's it. But there's also a heck of a lot of content to teach, and that's sometimes, particularly when you get to the older years, that's a barrier sometimes to how often you could do this. It's finding ways that are quick, short, that you can slot in, that maybe can be embedded as part of their homework, or equipping students with the skills that they do this retrieval practice themselves at home. This becomes a part of their study sessions as well. They don't just think, oh, I spent 6 hours revising at the weekend. They never actually checked what went in, what didn't go in. Can they retrieve that knowledge out? Can they retrieve it out quickly? Can they retrieve it out in the right context? And so see, workload efficient, and are we going to specify the knowledge? Are we not going to? And that's going to depend upon your point in the scheme of work. Yeah, I guess it's purpose of practicing, remember, and rehearsal of your knowledge is what retrieval practice is. That's what we are aiming for students to do. It's not about rote learning. We don't want them to be able to regurgitate something to us if we say a certain trigger word to them, we want them to actually have it embedded in their long-term memory, actually able to pull it out as is required. And I know lots of us use many of the online apps and stuff. None of my logos appeared when we did that. And there are obviously some great apps that can help us creating great little tracker sheets to help identify students' gaps in their knowledge and help us to move forward. So you've got Educate, Tassamy, Caboodle, Carousel Learning, Seneca, Century. They're also all really powerful ways that help us to do it without having an excessive workload for us, and they're programs that will use their intuitive nature to interleave units and topics and assessments for us, so we don't always have to. Yeah, lots of hopefully ways of thinking about how you do your current retrieval practice, different strategies you could use to just make it as effective as possible. So hopefully you found it useful. So there's half an hour left of this session. So it's just an opportunity for you to ask any individual questions you've got, to comment on anything that we've talked about today, share any great ideas of practice you've got. So I'll stay logged on, and then a chance to, stay and ask if you'd like to, or obviously won't be offended if you've got other stuff you'd like to get on with. But thank you very much for joining, and I think a recording is going to be sent out at some point as well. If you have got questions and stuff, then feel free to unmute yourself and do it on the chat if it's easier. I would agree. Multiple choice questions can be really, really useful, particularly well-planned hinge questions in a lesson, which can then, very subtle differences between the different options can be really telling in misconceptions that students have, and then which direction your lesson needs to go in. Absolutely, I do agree. But I think sometimes with retrieval practice, they're not always the only option, because they're not going to be the way that students are necessarily expected to always retrieve their knowledge in assessments for us and in life, I suppose. Tassamy, yeah, we found it really, really useful. I think particularly the knowledge trees that you get can be useful for helping to work on individual students' gaps in their knowledge. I think key when we were using Tassamy is locking down topics, so students aren't being asked questions on stuff that they haven't studied yet, or stuff that they studied, too far away that it's become so spaced that they can't retrieve it anymore, and then it just encourages guessing. I think key for us at the start was really locking down the questions they were getting, encouraging students to do that ethical thinking, and then building up to having lots of topics unlocked, and Tassamy then taking ownership of that, which questions to ask based on others they've got wrong. They've got loads of really good spreadsheets and stuff that you can download about which questions students got right, which ones they got wrong. We then begun to use them as our do now retrieval quizzes, at the start of lessons, if we identified certain questions lots of a class were getting wrong, we'd then do that in our lesson ourselves and then use a bit of time actually to correct some of the misconceptions students were having. This year we've actually moved away from TASMO. It was a school decision, and we're introducing something called sensory learning, which I think is a bit of a blend between TASMO and Seneca from what I've experienced of it so far. So actually students have to watch certain videos before they can do certain quizzes. So an OMR quiz, I'm not sure what you mean by OMR. I think it would probably, for me, if you mean how many answers for a multiple choice, I think it would depend upon the question that was being asked. With perhaps a balanced equation one, there might be lots of different versions of the same thing that you could include, which would then each an answer students could give you an indication of what was or wasn't their misconception, I suppose. Whereas for some of them, 3 might be sufficient. It also might depend upon the motivation of your class, the ability of the students in the class. And so it's that time between being able to read 5 answers, process those 5 answers, then retrieve your knowledge and be able to answer the question. For some students, that could be a barrier. For some high prioritainers, more gifted students, then yeah, 5, no matter how long or wordy they were or how many different slight nuances there were, they would still be able to access the information.